A man gave a beggar woman a roof over her head. She said nothing about her past. He asked nothing about her name. But on the night, he opened a locked box he hadn't touched in 40 years. He found a photograph, and the woman sleeping down the hall was the daughter he never knew existed. Stay with me, because before this night is over, someone will confess, someone will betray, and someone will discover that the greatest inheritance they ever gave was a family. His name was Emmanuel Boateng, 67 years old, CEO of Boateng Continental Holdings, a company with offices in Accra, Lagos, and Nairobi. His name appeared in Forbes Africa. His face appeared on billboards. His signature could move mountains or flatten them. But if you walked through the marble corridors of his mansion in the upscale East Legon Hills neighborhood of Accra on any given morning, what you would hear was silence, not peace. Silence. The cold, echoless silence of a house where no one laughs, where no one runs, where no one calls out from the kitchen to ask if you want tea. Emmanuel had been married twice. The first time ended when his wife, Abina, died of cancer at 34, leaving behind only her perfume on his pillow and a grief so deep he never fully surfaced from it. The second marriage had been a transaction, a polished woman named Vivian who wore his last name like a designer handbag and left it behind just as easily when she found someone wealthier. He had no children, or so he believed. Every morning, Emmanuel woke at 5. He dressed alone. He ate alone. His breakfast, sliced papaya, black coffee, 2 boiled eggs, was prepared by his cook Aniyama, who had worked for him for 22 years and who was the closest thing he had to a friend. He drove to the office in a black Mercedes G-Wagon with bulletproof glass. His driver, Kofi, knew better than to speak unless spoken to. He reviewed 12 reports before 9 a.m. He took meetings without sitting down. He made decisions worth millions without blinking. And every evening, he returned to the silence. Emmanuel Boateng had everything and felt nothing. Until the morning, everything changed. It was the first Tuesday of April. The harmattan had finally broken, and the air smelled of rain and red dust. Emmanuel was in the back of the G-Wagon, reading a contract, when Kofi slowed the car. "Sir," Kofi said carefully, "there is a situation." Emmanuel looked up. They had turned onto the bypass road, near the Kwame Nkrumah Circle, a road Emmanuel normally took to avoid traffic. And there, in the middle of the narrow street, a wooden cart had overturned. Mangoes, plantains, and green peppers were scattered across the asphalt. And beside the cart, a young woman was on her knees, desperately trying to gather the fruit before the traffic crushed it. She couldn't have been older than 30. She wore a faded blue dress with a torn hem. Her hair was wrapped in a yellow cloth. Her hands were bleeding. She had cut herself on something when the cart fell. And standing 3 feet behind her, holding the wheel of the overturned cart with both small hands and refusing to let go, was a boy. He looked about 8 years old, thin, serious-faced. His school uniform, white shirt, khaki shorts, was dirty at the knees. But his eyes were extraordinary. Dark, alert, watching the cars with a calm that seemed too old for his face. Emmanuel watched through the tinted glass. The woman had gathered maybe half her goods. A taxi driver was honking angrily. A truck swerved. She flinched. The boy did not. The boy looked directly at the truck. He did not move. He simply stood there, holding the cart wheel, his chin lifted, his jaw set, as if daring the world to try him. Emmanuel felt a chill run down the back of his neck. He had seen that expression before. He had worn that expression before, 40 years ago on the streets of Kumasi, when he was a boy selling groundnuts and the world had seemed designed to crush him. "Stop the car," Emmanuel said. "Sir." "I said stop the car, Kofi." The G-Wagon pulled to the side. Emmanuel stepped out for the first time in years without waiting for Kofi to open the door for him. He walked to the woman. She didn't see him coming. She was still gathering mangoes, hands shaking. "Let me help you," he said. She looked up, and Emmanuel Boateng, a man who had negotiated with heads of state, was struck speechless. Not by her beauty, though she had it. Not by her tears, though her eyes were glassy with them. He was struck by her cheekbones, by the exact angle of her jaw, by the shadow beneath her left eye that curved like a crescent moon. He had seen those features before. Not on her. Not on a stranger. On someone he had loved. Someone he had lost. Someone he had spent 40 years trying not to think about. He shook his head. He was being ridiculous. He was projecting old grief onto a stranger's face. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "God bless you, sir." "What happened?" The wheel cracked. I didn't see the pothole. She winced as she reached for a mango. Her cut hand scraped the ground. Emmanuel crouched. He picked up the mango. Then another. Then another. The boy came around the cart and stood beside his mother, watching Emmanuel with those ancient, careful eyes. What is your name? Emmanuel asked the boy. Kofi Mensah, the boy said. Not timidly. Clearly. Like a fact. Emmanuel smiled faintly. Strong name. My father's name, the boy said. And then, with no emotion, he left. The woman flinched. She didn't correct him. They loaded the cart together. Emmanuel's suit jacket brushed the asphalt. His driver watched with wide eyes from the car. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, pulling out phones. When the cart was upright, the woman looked at Emmanuel's hands, dusty, a little scratched, and her eyes filled again. I'm sorry, sir. Your clothes. Clothes wash, Emmanuel said. How far are you going? Makola. I have a spot there. That's 3 kilometers. I walk it every day. Emmanuel looked at her cut hand. He looked at the boy. He looked at the cracked wheel on the cart. It would not survive 3 kilometers. Where do you live? He asked. A pause. She looked down. We don't have a fixed place right now. We've been staying by the Coral Lagoon side. By the lagoon. Emmanuel knew what that meant. It meant they were sleeping in the informal settlements near the water. It meant no roof. It meant the boy went to school. Emmanuel could see the uniform and came home to a piece of tarpaulin and mosquitoes and the smell of the lagoon. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my car can take you to Makola. Sir, no, we can't. My car will take you to Makola, he said again. Not a question, not a request, a decision. And then I would like to speak with you for a few minutes. About something that might help. If you'll allow me. She studied him. He could see her calculating, threat or opportunity, trap or grace. She looked at her son. The boy nodded once. She exhaled. Okay, she said. Thank you. Her name, she told him in the car, was Adwoa Mensah. She was 29. She had grown up in Kumasi, moved to Accra 4 years ago following a man who had promised her a future and delivered only a son and a disappearance. She sold fruit. She did domestic work when she could find it. She had been trying for 2 years to save enough to rent even a single room. She told him all this matter-of-factly, not asking for sympathy, just answering his questions. The boy, little Kofi, sat between them and looked out the window at Accra passing by, as if memorizing it. Emmanuel listened. He asked questions. He nodded. And the whole time, something was pulling at him from the inside. Something formless and powerful that he could not name and would not have been able to explain. When they reached Makola Market, Emmanuel helped her set up her cart. He pressed a folded bill into her hand. She tried to refuse. He closed her fingers around it. This is not charity, he said. Consider it an investment. In someone who does not break. Her chin trembled. She held it still. I don't know why you're doing this, she said. Emmanuel looked at her. Really looked, one more time. I'm not sure I do either, he said honestly. But I'd like to understand. He gave her his card. His personal number, not the office line. If you need anything, he said, call me. He went back to his G-Wagon. Kofi was silent the entire drive back. Emmanuel stared at the city passing by the window. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt awake. That night, sitting on the concrete floor of the single room she had managed to rent 2 weeks earlier. A victory she hadn't mentioned to the man in the Mercedes. Adwoa Mensah looked at the business card. Emmanuel Boateng, CEO, Boateng Continental Holdings. She had recognized the name. Everyone in Ghana knew that name. She had just not expected the name to belong to a man who would crouch on the asphalt of Kwame Nkrumah Circle and pick up mangoes with her. She put the card in the small tin box under her bed. The tin box where she kept the things that mattered. The boy's birth certificate, a photograph, and a folded letter she had never been able to bring herself to read all the way through. The letter had belonged to her mother. Adwoa had found it in the pocket of her mother's funeral dress, the dress Adwoa had packed herself, because there was no one else to do it. Her mother, Afia, had died 3 years ago in a hospital in Kumasi. Malaria and exhaustion and a lifetime of being told she was not enough. Adwoa had never known her father. Her mother had raised her alone, fiercely, quietly, with the kind of love that doesn't explain itself. Whenever Adwoa asked about her father, Afia would go still. Then she would say, some things are better left where they are. Adwoa had learned not to push. But the letter in the funeral dress pocket was addressed to someone. The ink was faded and the paper was soft with age. The name on the outside, barely legible, was Boateng. Adwoa had read it once, 3 years ago, the day she found it. It was short, 3 paragraphs in her mother's careful, schoolgirl handwriting. She had put it back in the tin box before she reached the end. She wasn't ready. She still wasn't ready. She turned off the single light bulb and lay down beside her sleeping son. She stared at the ceiling. Boateng. Emmanuel Boateng. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. There were 1,000 Boatengs in Ghana. 100 with the initial E. She closed her eyes. But sleep did not come. Across town, in the East Legan Hills mansion, Emmanuel Boateng sat in his study and opened a drawer he hadn't opened in 4 decades. Inside was a photograph. A young woman, 22, maybe 23, laughing at something off camera, wearing a yellow dress, the kind of yellow that looks like held sunlight. Her name had been Adwoa Asani. Emmanuel had loved her the way you love things when you are young and have not yet learned that love can leave without warning. He had loved her completely, recklessly, without reservation. They had been together for 2 years, 1983 and 1984, in Kumasi, when he was a struggling entrepreneur and she was a secondary school teacher. He had planned to marry her. He had told her this. She had smiled that particular smile, the one that meant yes without saying it. And then the deal had come through. The business opportunity in London that his mentor had pushed him toward. It was the chance of a lifetime. 3 months abroad, seed funding, connections that would change everything. He had gone. He had written letters. She had written back, twice. Then the letters had stopped. He came home 6 months later with money and ambition and found that Adwoa had moved. Her address was different. Her neighbors knew nothing. He had looked for her. For months, he had looked for her. And then the business consumed him. And then Abina had come into his life. And he had loved her too. In a different way, a steadier way. And Adwoa Asani became a place he visited only in dreams. Until tonight. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in Adwoa's handwriting, the one who always comes back. 1983. He sat for a long time. He was thinking about cheekbones. And the shadow beneath a left eye that curved like a crescent moon. He was thinking about a boy who stood in front of traffic and did not move. And something ancient and enormous was beginning to stir in the back of his mind. Something he could not yet see clearly, but that cast a shadow, so large it covered everything. He put the photograph back in the drawer. He did not sleep that night either. She called him 3 days later. She hadn't intended to. She had held the business card for 3 days. She had put it away. She had taken it back out. She had argued with herself in the way you argue when you have been disappointed enough times to know that hope is expensive. But then Kofi had come home from school with a cough that wouldn't stop, and the landlady had knocked to say the weekly rent was overdue, and the mango supplier had raised his prices again, and Adwoa had sat on her concrete floor at midnight and finally admitted to herself that she was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives in your bones. She called the number on the card. It rang twice. He answered immediately, as if he had been waiting. "It's Adwoa," she said. "From the market." "I'm sorry to." "Don't apologize," he said. "Are you all right?" She had not expected that question. She had expected suspicion, or polite distance, or the brisk efficiency of a man whose time is accounted for in 15-minute increments. She was not prepared for the warmth in his voice. "My son is unwell," she said. I was wondering if you might know of a clinic that." "Where are you right now?" She told him. "I'm sending my car," he said. "Kofi will be there in 20 minutes. Bring the boy." "Sir, I don't need." "Adwoa." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Let someone help you. Just this once." She pressed her lips together. She looked at her son, who was asleep and making a small whistling sound with each breath. 20 minutes, she said. She didn't know it yet. She didn't know that this moment, this small surrender of pride, would change both their lives forever. The clinic was private. A doctor who treated Emmanuel's employees. A waiting room with cool air and soft chairs, and a receptionist who smiled without being told to. Kofi, little Kofi, had a chest infection. Not serious, the doctor said. Antibiotics and rest. He would be fine. Emmanuel was at the clinic when they arrived. He had come himself. Adwoa hadn't expected that either. He sat across from her in the waiting room while little Kofi was being examined. He had brought ground nuts in a paper bag from a street vendor, still the best snack in Accra, he said. And he offered her some with no ceremony, as if they did this every day. She took some. The silence between them was oddly comfortable. "You grew up in Kumasi?" he asked eventually. She looked at him. "Yes. How did you know?" "Your accent." "I grew up there too." Years ago. Small world, she said. Smaller than you think, he said quietly. And then, before she could ask what he meant, your mother, is she still there? Adwoa's expression shifted. My mother passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Adwoa's expression shifted. My mother passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. She was a strong woman. A teacher. Secondary school. Adwoa paused. She raised me alone. She never told me much about my father. A beat of silence. Emmanuel's coffee cup was halfway to his lips. He stopped. What was her name? He asked. Very carefully. Adwoa turned to look at him fully for the first time. Afia, she said. Afia Asante. The coffee cup went down on the table. Emmanuel Boateng sat very still. The kind of stillness that happens just before something breaks. Say that again, he whispered. Afia Asante. Why, did you know her? He stood up. He walked to the window. His back was to her. His shoulders, broad, controlled, the shoulders of a man who has carried weight his whole life, were trembling. Adwoa stood slowly. Mr. Boateng, are you all right? He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, when is your birthday? She blinked. Sorry, what is your date of birth? March 14th, 1985. What? March 1985. 9 months after he left for London. 9 months after the last time he had held Afia Asante in the yellow dress and told her he would come back, and she had smiled her yes without seeing it smile. He turned around. His eyes were wet. Adwoa took a step back. She had never seen a man like Emmanuel Boateng look like this, stripped of all the wealth and authority, looking at her like a man looking at his own life through glass. What is happening? She said softly. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had carried the photograph with him since the night he reopened the drawer. He didn't know why. Now he knew. He held it out to her. Adwoa took it. She looked at it, and the air left her lungs. It was her mother, young, laughing, in a yellow dress. Where did you get this? She breathed. She gave it to me, he said. In 1983. Her name is on the back. Adwoa turned it over. The handwriting. Her mother's careful, schoolgirl handwriting. The one who always comes back. She looked up. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were shaking. You're E. Boateng, she said. The letter. She had a letter. Addressed to E. Boateng. What letter? She was going to tell you. I think she was going to tell you. When I found it after she died, it was written but never sent. She must have. Adwoa's voice broke. She must have. Emmanuel stepped toward her. Adwoa. She couldn't speak. She pressed both hands to her mouth. He said it very quietly. I believe, that Afia Asante was pregnant when I left for London. And I think she never found a way to tell me. And I think. His voice cracked. I think you are my daughter. The room tilted. Adwoa reached for the wall. Emmanuel caught her arm. They stood there, the billionaire and the fruit seller, in a private clinic waiting room in Accra, holding each other up, while everything they thought they knew about their lives quietly rearranged itself into a completely different truth. A door opened. Little Kofi came out, the doctor behind him, holding a paper bag of medicine. He stopped when he saw his mother's face. Mama? What's wrong? Adwoa wiped her eyes quickly. She held out her arms. He came to her. Nothing is wrong, she said, though her voice shook. Nothing is wrong, my love. She looked over his head at Emmanuel. He was looking at the boy, at the set of his chin, at the way he stood, feet apart, grounded, unafraid. The way a Boateng stands. He did not make any demands. He did not announce anything. He simply said, I have a house with 30 empty rooms. One of them should have a child's laughter in it. He said it to Adwoa, quietly, in the parking lot of the clinic, while Kofi was asleep in the back of the G-Wagon. I'm not asking for anything from you, he continued. I'm not asking you to call me by any name you're not ready to use. I'm not asking you to tell anyone anything. Adwoa's expression shifted. My mother passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. She was a strong woman. A teacher. Secondary school. Adwoa paused. She raised me alone. She never told me much about my father. A beat of silence. Emmanuel's coffee cup was halfway to his lips. He stopped. What was her name? He asked. Very carefully. Adwoa turned to look at him fully for the first time. Afia, she said. Afia Asante. The coffee cup went down on the table. Emmanuel Boateng sat very still. The kind of stillness that happens just before something breaks. Say that again, he whispered. Afia Asante. Why, did you know her? He stood up. He walked to the window. His back was to her. His shoulders, broad, controlled, the shoulders of a man who has carried weight his whole life, were trembling. Adwoa stood slowly. Mr. Boateng, are you all right? He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, when is your birthday? She blinked. Sorry, what is your date of birth? March 14th, 1985. What? March 1985. 9 months after he left for London. 9 months after the last time he had held Afia Rasanti in the yellow dress and told her he would come back, and she had smiled her yes without seeing it smile. He turned around. His eyes were wet. Adwoa took a step back. She had never seen a man like Emmanuel Boateng look like this, stripped of all the wealth and authority, looking at her like a man looking at his own life through glass. What is happening? She said softly. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had carried the photograph with him since the night he reopened the drawer. He didn't know why. Now he knew. He held it out to her. Adwoa took it. She looked at it, and the air left her lungs. It was her mother, young, laughing, in a yellow dress. Where did you get this? She breathed. She gave it to me, he said. In 1983. Her name is on the back. Adwoa turned it over. The handwriting. Her mother's careful, schoolgirl handwriting. That forgiveness had cost her something. He understood that. The first 2 days were careful, formal, polite. Everyone tiptoed. On the third day, little Kofi asked Emmanuel to help him with a mathematics problem. Emmanuel sat down at the kitchen table and helped. They worked through it together, the old man and the 8-year-old, for 45 minutes, and at the end Kofi looked at him with those ancient eyes and said, "You're good at this. Did you like mathematics when you were small?" Emmanuel smiled. "It was the only subject I was good at. Everything else, I had to work twice as hard as everyone else. But numbers made sense to me. Numbers don't lie." Kofi considered this. "My mother says people lie, but not always on purpose. She says sometimes people are scared." Emmanuel looked at the boy. "Your mother is very wise. She knows a lot of things," Kofi said matter-of-factly. "She just doesn't always have the money to use them." Emmanuel felt that sentence in his chest like a splinter. And then, on the 5th day, the serpent arrived. Her name was Celestine Boateng, Emmanuel's younger sister. 59 years old. Sharp-faced, expensively dressed, with the particular elegance of someone who has always believed she is the most important person in any room. She was also the co-signatory on several of Emmanuel's business trusts, a position she had held for 20 years and had come to think of as a right rather than a privilege. Celestine had heard from the house manager, a thin, watchful man named Mr. Key, that her brother had installed a woman and her child in the East Legan Hills mansion. She had come without calling. She swept through the front door at 10 in the morning, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume, and found Adwoa in the garden, reading to Kofi from an encyclopedia. Celestine stopped. She took in the scene, the woman in the simple cloth dress, the boy lying on his stomach in the grass, the open book, and her expression arranged itself into something that looked like a smile but wasn't. "Well," she said. "What is this?" Adwoa stood. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Boateng's sister. He spoke of you." "I'm Adwoa. I know who you are," Celestine said. "You're the woman from the market. My brother's little charity project." She looked around the garden slowly, the way a lawyer looks at evidence. "He's done this before, you know. Takes in strays. It never ends well." "I'm not a stray," Adwoa said quietly. "No? Then what are you?" A long pause. Adwoa glanced at Kofi, who had sat up and was watching with his careful eyes. "I'm a guest," Adwoa said. "And this is not a conversation to have in front of a child." Celestine raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Then she looked at Kofi, really looked at him, and something flickered in her expression, something brief and unsettling, like a light going out. She covered it immediately. "Where is Emmanuel?" "He's in a meeting. He said he'd be back by noon." "I see." Celestine straightened her jacket. "Then I'll wait." She turned to go back inside, then paused. "Make sure you know what you're doing here, my dear. This house has a history, and history has a way of protecting itself." She went inside. Kofi looked at his mother. "I don't like her," he said. "Kofi." She looked at me like she was calculating something. Adwoa closed the encyclopedia. "Let's go inside." She was unsteady on her feet as she walked. Not from fear, from recognition. Because Celestine had seen something in Kofi's face. Adwoa had watched it happen. The double take, the flicker, the covering over. Celestine had seen something that surprised her. And Adwoa was beginning to understand that the secret she was carrying, the letter in the tin box, the truth she hadn't fully accepted yet, was not going to remain a secret in this house much longer. When Emmanuel returned at noon and found his sister sitting in his study like she owned it, He felt the particular weariness that only family can produce. She seems like a nice girl, Celestine said, before he had even closed the door. Very earnest. But Emmanuel, really, you should hear yourself. Hello, Celestine. Don't hello me. What are you doing? You've moved a market woman and her son into your home. People are talking. People always talk. Emmanuel. Her voice dropped. Something like real concern entered it. Celestine loved her brother, in her way. She could be anyone. She could be after the money, the connections, the name. You're not 25. You can't afford to be naive. She is my daughter, Celestine. Silence. Celestine stared at him. What did you say? Emmanuel sat down across from her. He told her everything. Afia Asante, London. The photograph. The letter that had never been sent. The birth date. He told her about the DNA test he had quietly arranged. Blood samples that had been collected at the clinic on the day Kofi had been treated for his chest infection, and whose results were now sitting in a sealed envelope in his desk drawer. He had not opened it yet. He was waiting for Adwoa to open it with him. Celestine listened to all of this without interrupting, which was not like her. When he finished, she was quiet for a very long time. Have you opened the envelope? She asked. No. I'm waiting for her. Emmanuel. Something shifted in her face, something he couldn't read. What if it's not true? What if she found out somehow about Afia, engineered the meeting, manufactured the whole thing? There are people who research wealthy men, who build elaborate stories. She didn't know who I was. You don't know that. I know what I saw in her face, Celestine. You saw what you wanted to see. You're a lonely man who... That's enough. His voice was quiet but final. Celestine pressed her lips together. She stood. She smoothed her jacket. Open the envelope, she said. Before you do anything else. Before you tell anyone else. Before you give her, or her son, anything more than you already have. Open the envelope. She walked out. Emmanuel sat alone in his study. He opened the desk drawer. The envelope was there. White. Sealed. His name in the doctor's handwriting. He picked it up. He put it back down. He went to find Adwoa. He found her in the kitchen. She was alone. Little Kofi was napping. The cook had gone to the market. Adwoa was standing at the counter, washing vegetables with focused, economical movements. She was humming something under her breath. A lullaby, maybe. Or a prayer. Emmanuel wasn't sure. He stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. She sensed him and turned. Oh, you're back. I need to talk to you about something. She dried her hands on a cloth. She looked at his face, and something in her went still. What happened? Nothing bad, he said quickly. I hope nothing bad. He held out the envelope. She looked at it. She knew what it was. He had told her about the blood test, had asked her permission. She had agreed. She had told herself she was ready. She took the envelope. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. She looked at him. Should I? Together, he said. She opened it. The paper inside was a single page. Laboratory letterhead, dense with technical language. But at the bottom, in plain English, probability of paternity, 99.97%. Adwoa read it twice. Then she put the paper on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the surface, leaning on it, breathing. Emmanuel didn't move. He waited. My mother knew, Adwoa said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She knew and she didn't tell you. Why wouldn't she tell you? I don't know, he said. I've been asking myself that for days. Was there something between you? Some argument? Some? No, there was nothing like that. When I left for London he stopped. His voice thickened. We were good. We were so good. Adwoa was quiet. Then, the letter. She left the kitchen. He followed. She went to her room, pulled the tin box from under the bed, opened it with hands that trembled. She took out the folded letter, old paper, soft as cloth, and held it. I couldn't finish it, she said. When I found it after her funeral, I started it and I put it away. I wasn't ready. She looked up at him. I'm still not sure I'm ready. You don't have to read it now. No. She unfolded it. I have to. She read. Emmanuel watched her read. Her face changed as her eyes moved down the page, something opening and breaking at the same time, like ice in spring. A sharp breath. Her jaw clenching. Tears falling without ceremony onto the old paper, making the faded ink run slightly. When she finished, she held the letter against her chest. She was afraid, Adwoa said. That's what she wrote. She was afraid that if she told you, that if you came back for her, it would be because of the baby and not because of her. She was afraid of being chosen out of obligation. A ragged breath. So she chose to be alone rather than risk it. Emmanuel sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. She raised you for 26 years rather than make one phone call, he said. Not accusing, just the vast, terrible mathematics of it. She thought she was protecting herself, Adwoa said. And maybe protecting me too. She thought a man who came back out of obligation would be worse than no man at all. She was wrong. I know. Adwoa wiped her face. But she didn't know that. She only knew what she had seen. Men who stayed because they had to, not because they wanted to. And she wanted you to want to. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, in the garden, a bird was singing. I would have wanted to, Emmanuel said softly. I know, Adwoa said again. I think she knew too, in the end. I think that's why she never threw the letter away. She was going to send it. And then she got sick. And then it was too late. He stood. He crossed the room. He stood in front of his daughter. Neither of them was entirely sure who moved first. But they held each other. This 67-year-old man and this 29-year-old woman, with 30 years of silence between them and a letter that had never been sent and a tin box full of the things that mattered, and they held each other for a very long time. In the doorway of the room, little Kofi stood. He had woken from his nap. He had heard voices. He had come quietly to the doorway, and he had found his mother crying in the arms of Emmanuel Boateng. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. He crept forward and wrapped his arms around both of them. Family hug, he announced solemnly. Emmanuel laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and old. Adwoa laughed too, through her tears. And in that moment, in that ridiculous, improbable, beautiful moment, Emmanuel Boateng, who had everything and felt nothing, felt something. He felt the whole weight of his life shift, gently, into meaning. And then the world broke in. It started with a phone call to a gossip journalist. The caller had been careful. They had used a public phone, the kind still found near certain markets in Accra. They had given just enough information to light a fire. A name, a story, a suggestion. Within 48 hours, a story appeared on a popular Ghanaian entertainment and society website. Boateng Continental Air Drama. Billionaire installs market woman and son in mansion. Claimed to be long-lost daughter, sources say. The article was 300 words long. It was scornful in tone. It included a photograph, taken over the wall of the compound by someone with a long-lens camera, of Adwoa and little Kofi in the garden. By noon, it had 20,000 shares. By evening, Emmanuel's phone was ringing with calls from board members, lawyers, journalists, and people he had not spoken to in years. Emmanuel sat in his study and read the article without expression. Then he picked up his phone and called his house manager, Mr. Key. Mr. Key, he said. The journalist who wrote this article was given specific details about a private conversation that took place in this house. Details about the DNA test. Details about the letter. A pause. Details that only 3 people knew about. Mr. Key was silent. I am going to ask you once, Emmanuel said. And I would like you to think carefully before you answer. Did you make a call? A very long silence. Mr. Boateng, he began. I've worked for your family for 15 years. Did you make a call? Another silence. And then, in the quietest possible voice, Mrs. Celestine asked me to. The world tilted. Emmanuel set down the phone. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the guest suite where Adwoa had just seen the article on her phone and was sitting on the bed, pale and still. Did you know about this? She asked. Her voice was very controlled. I just found out, he said. I'm so sorry. Your sister. I know. She told the press before we even. Adwoa stood. She began moving around the room with the focused urgency of someone who has survived by staying mobile. We need to leave. Before the cameras come. Before Kofi sees. Adwoa. Stop. She stopped. She turned. I am not going to let this hurt you, he said. I have resources. I have lawyers. I have the DNA results, the letter, 40 years of documentation about Afia Osani. We go public, properly, on our terms, with everything. We don't hide. This is not just about me, she said. It's about Kofi. He is 8 years old, and there are cameras outside our wall. I know. He crossed to her. I know. And I understand if you want to leave. I will provide for you, quietly, fully, with no conditions, whether you choose to stay or go. But I am asking you. I am asking my daughter, not to let my sister's fear take this from us. She searched his face. Why would she do this? She asked. Emmanuel was quiet for a moment. Because if I acknowledge a daughter, my estate changes. My trusts change. Celestine has been the default beneficiary of certain trusts for 20 years. He said it flatly, without drama. It was never about malice. It was about money. That's worse than malice. Yes, he agreed. It is. He called Celestine that evening. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. Emmanuel, you called Key. A pause. I was protecting the family. You were protecting your inheritance. Silence. Celestine. His voice was not angry. It was something worse. It was deeply sad. I have loved you all my life. I have protected you, supported you, defended you. And you took the most important thing that has ever happened to me and turned it into a tabloid story. I didn't think. No, you did think. You thought very carefully. He heard her exhale. She might not be. Celestine began. She is. The DNA says so. The letter says so. I say so. A pause. I want you to understand something. I am going to acknowledge Adwoa. I am going to revise my estate arrangements. And I am going to take care of my daughter and my grandson for the rest of my life. None of that is negotiable, and none of it requires your approval. Emmanuel, the board will. The board answers to me. Another pause. I hope, in time, you'll understand. And I hope, in time, you'll want to know her. She is extraordinary, and her son is the most remarkable child I have ever met. His voice softened at the end. He couldn't help it. But that is your choice. All I'm asking is that you don't stand in the way of mine. He ended the call. He sat in his study for a long time. Then he called his lawyer. Then he called a journalist, not the gossip blog, but a respected national newspaper journalist he had known for 20 years. I'd like to give you a story, he said. The real one. The press conference was Emmanuel's idea. Adwoa had argued against it at first. She wanted privacy, she said. She had lived her whole life in the margins and was not sure she wanted to step into the light. I understand, he said. But the story is already out. What's in the public space now is their version. I'd like us to tell our own. She had agreed. On one condition. Kofi doesn't stand up there, she said. Not yet. He is 8. Let him keep being 8 for a while longer. Agreed. The press conference was held in the conference room of Boateng Continental Holdings. Emmanuel sat at the center of the long table. His PR team. His legal team. His personal assistant of 20 years. And beside him, composed and quiet in a simple navy dress, Adwoa. The room was full of journalists and cameras. The national broadcaster was live. Emmanuel spoke for 7 minutes. He told the story, cleanly, without melodrama, with the kind of authority that comes from someone who knows he is telling the truth. He described Adwoa Asante, their relationship, his departure for London. He described the letter. He announced that the Boateng Continental Foundation, his charitable arm, would be renamed the Adwoa Asante Boateng Foundation, in honor of the woman who had raised his daughter alone and with extraordinary grace. He announced the creation of a scholarship fund, 50 awards per year, for children of single mothers pursuing secondary school education. He said, I was absent from my daughter's life through no fault of her own and through no fault of mine. I will not be absent anymore. Then he looked at Adwoa. She took the microphone. She spoke for 3 minutes. Adwoa Mensah, who had survived on mangoes and resourcefulness and the refusal to break, stood in front of the cameras and spoke. She spoke about her mother, about Adwoa Asante's quiet strength and her fear and the love she had given her daughter in the complete absence of everything else. She did not apologize for her mother. She did not idealize her. She simply described a real woman who had done her best with what she had. She said, I spent 29 years believing I came from nothing. I learned this month that I come from a great deal. But I want to be clear. The greatness I come from is not this company, or this man's money, or his name. The greatness I come from is a woman who worked 2 jobs and read me stories every night and never, not once, let me believe that I was less than worthy of any room I entered. She paused. What I have gained here is not wealth. I have gained a father who looked at me and chose not to look away. In a world where people look away constantly, that is everything. The room was very quiet when she finished. Then the applause started. What happened next happened fast, in the way of things in the digital age. The press conference was shared millions of times. The original tabloid story, with its sneering tone and stolen photograph, was buried under the avalanche of the real one. People wrote. People called. People shared their own stories of absent fathers and rediscovered families and the small, world-changing moments that happen at overturned market carts. Little Kofi, at his school, was pulled aside by his teacher. Your grandfather's speech is in all the newspapers, his teacher said. How are you feeling? Kofi thought about it. Like I'm in a book, he said. Except it's better because it's real. Mr. Key, the house manager who had made the call to Celestine, resigned. He delivered a letter of apology to Emmanuel, a genuine one, Emmanuel thought, from a man who had been caught between old loyalties and new circumstances. Emmanuel accepted it quietly. He gave the man a reference and 3 months' salary and shook his hand. Some betrayals, Emmanuel thought, do not require destruction. Some require only a door, firmly and kindly closed. Celestine was another matter. She did not attend the press conference. She watched it from her living room, alone, with a glass of water she forgot to drink. Afterward, she sat for a long time. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She got in her car. She drove to East Legan Hills. She rang the bell. The gate opened. She walked through the garden, the same garden where she had been cold and calculating 2 weeks ago, and she found Adwoa sitting on the grass with Kofi, reading. The boy looked up. His eyes were flat and assessing. I know you don't like me, Celestine said to him. I know I didn't behave well. I understand if you still don't like me. She looked at Adwoa. I am sorry, she said. That's all I came to say. I was afraid, and I was wrong, and I am sorry. Adwoa looked at her for a long time. My mother was also afraid, she said finally. And she also did things out of fear that she later regretted. I understand fear. A beat. I don't forgive you today, but I am willing to see what tomorrow looks like. Celestine nodded. She looked at the boy again. You look like your grandfather, she said, when he was your age. I have a photograph somewhere. I'll find it. Kofi considered her. That would be evidence-based, he said. Celestine blinked. Then she laughed. A sudden, unguarded laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Evidence-based, she repeated. Yes, I suppose it would be. She sat down in the grass, careful about her suit for only a moment, and opened the encyclopedia that was lying open beside Kofi. What are you reading about? She asked. Ocean currents, he said. Ah, she said. I know a little about those. Really? I studied marine biology for 2 years before I gave it up for business. She turned a page. I sometimes think that was the wrong choice. Kofi looked at her. It's not too late, he said seriously. Grandfather says it's never too late. He says he is 67 and still learning things. Celestine Boateng looked at this child, this boy who stood in front of traffic and did not move, and felt something in her chest loosen, something that had been held very tight for a very long time. Your grandfather is right, she said quietly. He usually is. I just rarely tell him that. 6 months later, the Afia Asani Boateng Foundation held its first scholarship ceremony. 50 young people, children of single mothers from Kumasi, Accra, Tamale, Takoradi, Sunyani, received the awards that would take them through secondary school. Adwoa stood at the podium and read each name herself. Little Kofi sat in the front row in a new school uniform. His own school, the same school, no transfer to something grander, because Adwoa had insisted on that, and watched his mother with the expression of someone who has decided that the person at the front of the room is the most interesting thing in it. Emmanuel sat beside Celestine in the second row. They were not entirely repaired, but they were trying. After the ceremony, Emmanuel found Adwoa in the corridor of the venue, standing alone for a moment, looking out a window at the city below. How are you? He asked. Overwhelmed, she said honestly. Good, overwhelmed, but still overwhelmed. It will calm down. Will it? Eventually, everything does. He stood beside her. How is Kofi adjusting? He asked me last week if Emmanuel is his grandfather or his friend, she said. I told him both. Emmanuel smiled. What did he say? He said that was confusing but probably efficient. Emmanuel laughed, that deep, real laugh that had been absent from his house for so long. He's going to be extraordinary, he said. I know, Adwoa said. I've always known. I just couldn't always give him the space to be. A pause. The city moved below the window, busy, alive, full of ordinary people carrying extraordinary loads. Can I tell you something? Emmanuel said. Yes. The day I stopped the car, at Kwame Nkrumah Circle, I didn't stop because of you. I mean, he searched for the words. I stopped because of the boy, the way he stood. It was my own childhood standing there. And I thought, I cannot drive past this. I cannot look the other way. He paused. I had no idea what I was driving toward. I had no idea the boy's mother was my own daughter. I just knew I couldn't look away. Adwoa was quiet for a moment. My son stopped you, she said softly. Your son stopped me. She turned to look at him fully. You know what that means, don't you? She said. A little 8-year-old boy standing at an overturned fruit cart changed both our lives. Yes, Emmanuel said. Because he looked like he wasn't afraid, she said. Even though he was. He was always afraid. He just never let the fear be the last thing. She said this simply, without drama. But it landed in Emmanuel's chest like a stone in still water, sending ripples out in every direction. Afia's grandson, he said. And your grandson, she said. Both. He reached out. He took her hand, his daughter's hand, calloused from years of carrying carts and washing produce and holding a little boy through everything the world had thrown at them, and he held it. They stood at the window together and looked at the city. Later that evening, at the mansion, Emmanuel sat in his study, the same study where he had opened the old drawer and found the photograph and felt the first tremor of a world about to change. The drawer was open. The photograph was on the desk. Afia Asante, young and laughing, in a yellow dress. He looked at it for a long time. Then he took a piece of paper and a pen. He still wrote by hand when the words mattered, and he began to write. Dear Afia, I don't know if letters reach where you are. I've never been sure about that kind of thing, but I find I need to write this one. You gave me a daughter. You raised her alone for 26 years, through everything, and she is magnificent. She is brave and honest, and she has your cheekbones and your capacity to carry weight without bending. She is so much you that it sometimes stops me in the middle of a sentence. And she gave me a grandson who stands in front of traffic without flinching, who asks better questions than most of my executives, who says things like evidence-based when he means he wants proof, and who will probably, in time, outgrow all of us. I understand why you didn't send the letter. I don't entirely forgive it, because 29 years is a long time for a child to go without a father. But I understand it. You were afraid of obligation. You deserve desire. I know that. Here is what I wish you knew. It would have been desire. All of it. Every day of it. But perhaps this was the path we were meant to take. Adwoa survived everything without me, and that means she knows exactly who she is without needing me to tell her. There is something powerful in that. Something you gave her that I couldn't have. Thank you for the daughter. Thank you for the grandson. Thank you for keeping the letter. Emmanuel. He folded it. He placed it next to the photograph. He would not send it. There was nowhere to send it. But he felt, sitting back in his chair in the quiet study, that something that had been unfinished for 40 years was, finally, imperfectly, beautifully complete. The next morning, Emmanuel woke at 5. He dressed. He walked downstairs. He walked past the kitchen and stopped. Adwoa was already there. She was at the stove. The coffee was on. The papaya was sliced. The eggs were boiling. She looked up when she heard him. You're up early, he said. I'm always up early, she said. Old habit. He pulled out a stool at the kitchen counter and sat down. From upstairs, through the ceiling, came the sound of small footsteps. Kofi, awake and running. The footsteps came down the stairs, faster and faster, and then the kitchen door burst open and the boy ran in, hair wild, still in his pajamas, eyes bright. Grandfather, he announced, I had a dream about ocean currents. Tell me, Emmanuel said. And Kofi climbed onto the stool next to him and began, with great seriousness and considerable arm gestures, to describe the dream. Adwoa listened. She smiled. She turned back to the stove. The kitchen was warm. It smelled of coffee and papaya and something cooking. Outside the window, the Accra morning was beginning. Red sky, mist on the hills, a bird starting up its song. Emmanuel Boateng sat in his kitchen and listened to his grandson describe ocean currents. And the silence, the cold, echoless, expensive silence that had filled this house for so long, was completely and entirely gone. Emmanuel Boateng had everything the world tells us to want. Money, power, status, his name on buildings. And every night, he came home to silence. Until a fruit cart overturned on a street corner. Until a boy stood in front of a truck and did not move. Until a man with a driver and a G-Wagon got out of his car and crouched down on the asphalt and picked up mangoes. One act of ordinary human decency. That is all it took. You never know what universe-changing discovery is waiting on the other side of the simplest choice. The choice to stop, to look, to not drive past someone who needs help. You never know who you are driving past. And now, I want to hear from you. If you had been in Emmanuel's position, if you discovered, at 67 years old, that you had a daughter you never knew about, living on the streets of your own city, what would you do first? Would you open your door? Would you be afraid? Would you trust what the DNA said, or what your heart already knew? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who has been searching for a parent, or a child, or a piece of themselves that got lost somewhere along the way, share this story with them. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes the best thing you can do for someone who is lost is say, you are not the only one. Drop the name of your country in the comments below. From Accra to Abidjan, from Lagos to Lusaka, from London to Louisville, I want to know where you are watching from. If this story moved you, leave a like. Not for the algorithm, but because Afia Asante deserved a monument, and this is the only one we have. Subscribe to HD Story, where every human being has a story worth telling, and where we tell them the way they deserve to be told, with honesty, with heart, and without looking away. Take care of yourself. And remember, the most valuable inheritance is not what you leave behind. It is who you choose to become.